Let's see who accepts it. Twitch has accepted the stream. YouTube has accepted the stream. And Facebook has accepted the stream. Do you want me to send the link to anybody, Vicky?
Oh, yeah, to me.
Okay, you got
To
it.
me. So I need to put it on the Peace Center Facebook page also.
You got it.
Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, we're a little out of, that routine right now.
So, Vicky, how long will the show last?
That's why I said it's just under an hour.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good because I'm on a fast and I didn't have my supper yet. So,
Okay. Well, so
Okay, Vicky, sending the link over to you.
okay.
You like text, if
Sure.
I'm not mistaken,
Text
right?
is great.
All right.
Yeah, it'll be just under. We're shooting for 58 minutes when we start taping.
All right, I just texted the link to you. Did it come in?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so we should be set to go.
All right, are you ready to start the show?
Yep.
Okay. When you see the timer say on the air, you're on the air, okay?
Okay.
All right, let me turn myself off here. And start the timer.
Thanks. Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio, also the home of our producer and friend, Richard Wicca. Thanks, Richard. And we also thank our friends at WBNY, Buffalo State, coming out of Buffalo State University, Buffalo's original alternative radio station at 91.3 FM. Thank you, Buff State. And when I think of thankfulness, I think of our indigenous friends and our friends really of so many groups, who have suffered so much through enslavement, through the theft and violence that indigenous people have suffered, and yet thankfulness is above all what they think of. They're thankful and thank Mother Earth for all that she gives us. Thank all the water, the living waters, the creatures and the plants, the trees, and all the celestial beings of the sun, the moon, the stars, and the Creator. And they, despite all the hardships that they've had. And so then they say Yahweh or Ashe, and the people say Nyo or Ashe. So you could say Nyo and thank you. So I'm especially excited about the show tonight. And so, we have so many great shows. We have two very special guests on a really very vital topics that are current and all intertwined. So I'm very grateful that we have a show that will be talking about Palestine, militarism, colonialism, and fossil fuels, and how all those issues are interrelated, interconnected, and hopefully about what some of the things we can do about it. And our special guests are just going clockwise. If for those of you who can see, we have Brad Wolf coming. Hi, Brad.
Hello, Vicky. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming. So Brad is one of the co-coordinators of the Merchants of Death Tribunal, as well as a writer, an author, a peace activist, and he has a new book about Philip Berrigan and his writings that we'll talk about some as well. So thank you for coming on, Brad. And then
You are welcome.
and then we're very excited. Also, Nick Modern is coming in. Oh, and I should say, Brad, you're in Pennsylvania, right?
I am in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Lancaster, right. So, and now we have Nick Modern coming in, and now is it Northampton, Mass that you're in now?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and Nick, thank you for coming on. I know you've been busy, and just came back in town. And we're so glad that you can manage to get on this show. Nick is one of the co-coordinators of Ban Killer Drones and has been very active about drones and also another coordinator of the Merchants of Death Tribunal. So thank you, Nick, for coming on.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
So, and we go back. I was thinking about all the different things that you do. Build drone facsimiles, drag them around the country, and everything else. So, plenty of things that you've been doing over the years. Besides, I won't even get to talking about Mary Knoll and all of that. Maybe that will come up. So, thank you for joining us.
I'm really happy to do it, Vicki.
So, we like to start out first with that Ganonyo, which is really a land acknowledgement as well of the Haudenosaunee land that we are on. And you each, as we said, are quite a distance from here, and also enslaved people and just how much they've suffered, and just how important that thankfulness is, and that acknowledgement. So we want to acknowledge those things and be thankful. But we also, the other thing we like to do in the beginning of the show is really about values. So when you think of Palestine, of militarism, of colonialism and fossil fuels, those issues, when you think of those issues, what are the values that you think need to be in this conversation? So we'll just go on that talking circle format. So Brad, we'll start with you, and then Nick, and then back to me.
Sure. That's a great way to start, too. I love the idea of values. And certainly, I think the value of our shared humanity when I'm taking a look at what's going on in Gaza, the endless wars, the U.S. military empire, and then fossil fuels, which are poisoning our environment and creating climate change. And unless we come to an understanding that we are part of a shared humanity, a larger human family, or that beloved community that Dr. King always spoke about, until we start to share that value, it's going to be hard for us to stop everything that's going on. But certainly, I think there's a large number of people who do share that particular value and do look at people in Gaza and recognize the individuals there as their brothers and sisters. And they want the suffering and the needless death to stop. And they recognize that the United States plays a key role in fomenting so much needless suffering and death across the globe. And as Americans, we have a responsibility to try to stop it. And that's another value, is responsibility. What is our responsibility to try to stop what's going on, stop this suffering, and to help?
Right. Well, thank you. Those are so important. That shared humanity and that shared responsibility, and particular responsibility, actually, for U.S. citizens here in the belly of the beast. And Nick, what are some values that you would say you think of in this connection?
Well, I think I share what Brad said, and I think the average person watching what is happening is absolutely incredulous that people could be left in such abject suffering and attack. A value in relation to this has to do with, if you want to put that, law enforcement. After World War II, 1948, Eleanor Roosevelt was the wife of the president who had died, but she worked within the UN to develop a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And all the suffering in World War II led to this. And for the average person, I think they look toward these kind of laws and standards of behavior that have been totally ignored by the elites of these countries. The U.S. is disobeying several laws passed by Congress, notably the Leahy law that would prevent weapons from being shipped to Israel under these circumstances. We have a member of Congress here in James McGovern, who is a co-chair of Human Rights Commission in Congress, and we have pressed him relentlessly to call for an absolute stop to weapon shipments because, for one thing, it's breaking the law.
Right.
You have the United Nations passing a resolution for a ceasefire that's being ignored. And so I think the message I'm getting is that the elites of the various governments in the world have more in common with each other than they do with the people they're supposed to represent. Because if they did go with what the majority of people say in their country, this thing would already be stopped. And I think that's a wake-up call for the world's vast majority of the world's population, is that the leaders of their country are not representing human values, human interests, Declaration of Human Rights, or the law.
Right. No, you're not kidding. It's absolutely against the law. And in fact, making me think of the Kellogg's Briand Pact, which made war illegal before the Second World War, actually. So war has been against the law. Usually, when I think about the values, I often say truth and love. I think about Reverend Dr. King, how he said that truth and love will be the things that will have the final word in reality. But what actually, what I think of now, even more so, is as we were talking, I'm thinking about moral integrity and universal solidarity. That's what actually Cornel West used that phrase when he was on our show, our Western New York Peace Center speaking at the dinner. Moral integrity means following the law and following either the universal laws or the actual laws. So these international laws are the law of the land, are under the supremacy clause. They are the actual of law of the land of equal force with the Constitution. So integrity would mean giving that some importance, and following it and acknowledging it. So this breaking of the Leahy law, ignoring of the Declaration of Human Rights, and of course I can't help mentioning the DRIP, UN DRIP as well, the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, which are also being broken. So we have a lot to unpack on this radio show, where it says, well, we'll start with the situation in Gaza. Why don't we start with that? And then it's really not, a lot of it's very specific to Gaza, and yet some of it is not that specific. It's actually replicated in other places in the world where militarism, colonialism, and fossil fuels or other resources are all in question. So why don't we just go around and, sharing some thoughts about what is the current situation there now. So Brad, we'll start again. We'll just go around.
Sure. And the current situation in Gaza, I think we have to remember that this is not the Israeli war on the Palestinians, but this is the U.S. war on the Palestinians. Israel would not be able to do that without this enormous supply of weapons from the United States. And so we are co-conspirators with Israel in conducting a genocide against Palestinian people. And part of what we're doing in the War Crimes Tribunal, the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal, is trying to hold these actors accountable, these U.S. weapons manufacturers accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And You were just talking about laws. These are international laws that we allege that they're violating. I think it's clear to anybody watching what's happening in Gaza right now that this is genocide. This is not Israeli self-defense, but this is the slaughter of innocent people, 13,000 children and 30,000 others. This is just a slaughter and a genocide in violation of numerous laws, but specifically the weapons manufacturers like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and General Atomics. There are 4 defendants in the tribunal. They're making a tremendous amount of money off of this genocide and off of wars that have been going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Sudan. We have U.S. troops fighting and conducting combat missions in so many places. The American people don't even know about it. It's hidden in plain sight. I think you've had Norman Solomon on here, or are going to have Norman Solomon on here.
Mm-hmm.
He's very good at talking about how America hides its wars. But, these are wars for profit. And what's happening in Gaza right now is a tragedy. It's a crime. It's a genocide. And to think that it's being done for profit is particularly galling.
Right. You're so right. Nick?
I think the thing I'd like to say about what is Israel to the United States and why do we give this kind of cooperation and actually, as Brad said, co-conspirators. If we look at the United States as a colonial power, an empire, if you put it as a colonial power, you really have to then say, well, who are the colonies of the United States? And why is it that we can't organize, a resistance among leaders of various countries? And you could probably say that the leadership of the world is broken down into either people who are immensely benefiting from various colonial systems or people who are allowed to be heads of government by a colonial system, very few independent, like South Africa or Nicaragua, who've chosen to challenge this. So what is Israel's role in the Middle East? If we look over the last 20 years, we've seen Israel acting really without any international restraint to attack in Syria, to attack in Iran, to assassinate people in Iran, in a complex oil situation. There's a competition, among Middle Eastern countries around oil. But the big problem for the United States with Iran is that they've nationalized their oil system. That was a big problem with Iraq. It was intolerable. And so going forward, the United States would like to see an Iran that was somewhat like Saudi Arabia or Iraq. And if possible, to have a very disorganized, shattered government like the one in Iraq, where you can pump oil all day long without having to worry about mobilization to raise prices or to get a fair share. And so people would say, oh, well, yeah, that's a very simplistic, analysis. But Israel is very entwined with the United States militarily from a technical standpoint. Mm-hmm. Students at Cornell University have been protesting to get divestment, Cornell to divest from weapons stocks. They're also trying to get Cornell to disentangle itself from a company called Technion. It's an Israeli company that has to do with, military developments. And I think the big tragedy for Jewish people one of them is that the suffering and the trauma of the Holocaust is being grossly exploited by the United States and the current government in Israel for very self-interested purposes. I mean, personally self-interested purposes. And if you say, well, what should they do? And a woman was asking me about this, a woman who has relatives in Palestine today up at Smith College, she was asking me, well, didn't all these bad things happen, on October 6th? And what about the Holocaust and this and that? But you could say that the best thing that the Jewish government and the Israeli government, if you want to, because they identify it as really a religious government, what would be the best thing they could do after October 6th would be to say,
October 7th.
October 7th would be to say, we're not going to take vengeance, we're not going to attack, we're not going to go down our former path. We're going to identify the people who are responsible for this to the degree possible and see them prosecuted rather than assassinated. This would be a dramatic turn away from the history of how Israel has chosen to deal with these things. And just think if they had done that, what a different situation we would have today. They wouldn't have followed what happened after 9/11 with George Bush attacking and telling people to go shopping. So we're at and I'll have to say this too, that with these people who are 20 years old in these various colleges and are graduating high school and whatever, they're looking at this behavior very differently than people my age and even your age, because what they're seeing is a world that they don't want to inhabit. They don't know what to do about it. And so they are motivated in a very different way and with a very different analysis about this. And and thank God they are. But this whole idea of colonialism is very keen on their minds, and Israel's role in as a colonial power, a co-conspirator with the United States, is very much on their minds right now. It's not just from the river to the sea. They're asking themselves, how do we get out of this and stop the killing, not just here but everywhere.
Well, you're so right. Although the one thing I'd say it's a world that they want to be able to inhabit, because that it comes up to be a question how habitable the earth will be if we continue on the paths that we are on. It's interesting what you said about October 7th and the Israeli government. I know after 9/11, I'm going to guess that probably all three of us were there in New York City at different points, where I know I brought this big, huge sign that said, "Honor them with peace." It had two pictures of the towers, a picture of the towers, of the two towers, and it said, "Honor them with peace," because that was what we had the sympathy of the whole world, as Israel would have or could have. And the other thing is, and it is true in both those cases, and this is the thing about the violence, is that violence begets violence. That's what we know. We've seen it. We see it time and again. And so it is the payback, so I love this bumper sticker I once saw. I'm always thinking of this. There is no violent solution. So if it's violent, it's not going to be a solution. It's going to be a temporary fix that's going to lead to more violence down the road. So that is what's been happening in Israel and Palestine right along. I want to say, as the daughter of a German Jew who actually had to leave Nazi Germany in 1933 as a 15-year-old because he was such a radical. I know a lot of people have heard me proudly talk about my dad, which am very proud. And he went to then Palestine, and he was on a kibbutz, and then, he ended up, he was in an agricultural school and joined the British police and then the British Army. And we believe that he was in the Haganah at the time, which was the Israeli underground. So there are things that happened then, I'm so glad you brought up about the trauma. So Jewish people are traumatized, that it may be some of the most traumatized the most long-standing trauma, because the trauma came from, at least certainly from even before Christ, where the Jews got blamed for the crucifixion, as well as, before that there was the Babylonians and the Egyptian enslavements and hostage taking, right? In that ancient time. So there's been trauma and pogroms and and then with the Holocaust, and then it continued on from there. So all of that trauma, through nature and nurture, acts on people. So that is going on, and
Right.
I appreciate what you said of people. It's the natural feelings that are in people that are being taken of advantage. I'm going to go back to the truth and love, where truth is not a simple thing. We try to make it simple, but people tell the story, and sometimes knowingly or unknowingly slanting it in different ways or leaving other parts out, or so there's a lot of untruths, or what is it? Stephen Colbert calls it truthiness. Like, I think it feels true to me, so I'm going to say it. And then the misinformation that gets spread out all around. So we have all of that going on. So when I think about what's going on in Israel and Palestine and Gaza in particular, is just the tragedy of just this massive violence that cannot but produce incredible amount of blowback. So just like we did, just like the U.S. did after 9/11, instead of going that route of, isolating the people who were actually responsible and going after it as a criminal matter, you just use it as an excuse to start blowing people up. And, we were going to do a show that was mostly about what's coming out of the skies. So the drones, which have been, the constant surveillance, and the bombs and all of that going on. And people are so traumatized. They were already traumatized on both sides, right? Now the trauma is even worse, and it's getting worse. And it's worse in Buffalo, New York. I know that people people are so upset, because it is just a tragedy that's unfolding, and nobody is benefiting except for the arms manufacturers, who are going cha-ching for the U.S., who is shoveling all those armaments and munitions that way. It's just crazy. And then meanwhile, the people are just, starving and dying, and the diseases are coming. It's just a terrible tragedy. So Gaza and Palestine, people are suffering deeply, as they are suffering also in Israel. And they're so there's no winning here, except for the arms manufacturers.
Well, I think the oil cartels are benefiting. Bankers, investment houses, other things that they're, dependent on a colonial kind of arrangements. These are all people who are rooting for the elimination of the Palestinian problem, i.e., get rid of all the people one way or the other. So there are beneficiaries that are beyond just the weapons makers, and I think one of the problems we have is that very often it can seem as though, well, the weapons makers are responsible, when in fact they are responsible for the weapons that are killing, but they are massively supported by places like BlackRock Investment House, Vanguard Investment, State Street Investment. These are companies that are major stockholders in weapons makers. They're also major stockholders in other things. I was just talking with a woman today who follows private equity, things that don't go on the stock market, and how that's flowing into weapons making, because it's looked on as a huge growth industry, especially robotic weapons and AI directed surveillance and targeting. So that whole level of interlocking financial interests are all happy as they can be with what's going on right now, and it's and frankly, that's why it's going on. It's because these governments don't have the courage or the wherewithal, and it's also true that many of these government leaders are afraid of getting assassinated behind all this. So we've got a violence-based economy, and in so many countries that but it will fall. In my mind, there's no question it will fall. And you talked about love. Well, it has to translate into action. So it means Brad, for instance, he got himself arrested down in front of Lockheed Martin on Good Friday. Other people are getting arrested in other places. So those are all questions for people as to how we're going to respond to this and not accept it.
So let's turn to you, Brad. What would you say about?
Yeah, I mean, just to
the
follow up on what
situation?
Nick was
Right.
saying about these wars, we interviewed at the tribunal, we interviewed Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was the chief of staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. And Wilkerson said that predatory capitalism is the driver of many of America's wars. And I think we have to acknowledge that these are corporate wars. They're being fought for the benefit of corporations, whether they be financial institutions, fossil fuel companies, weapons manufacturers. And we all know Smedley Butler, right? Who over 100 years ago said that war is a racket. I'm a gangster for capitalism, and it's gotten worse. So these corporate wars continue. We're giving up $1 trillion a year of our tax dollars to fund the fact that corporations can get more powerful and richer, and in the process kill a lot of innocent people. So that's an outrage. And every American, regardless of political party, should be outraged at the idea that that is going on. And I think that's one thing that we can certainly come together on. We don't want our tax dollars going to killing innocent people. We're seeing that happen in Gaza all the time, but it's happening all around the world with U.S. forces. And when you're trying to seek world hegemony the way the U.S. is, and doing so for the benefit of corporations, then a lot of innocent people are going to die. And it is great to see so many young people coming out and being involved and being so adamant in their stance against this. That's encouraging, and I think it's an important moment for us.
Well, so when we were setting up this show, I said I put it down, Palestine, because of so much going on there right now. But as we said, replicated all over the world. Other hot spots in Haiti, in Ukraine, just so many places. I said I put militarism and colonialism as if they were two separate things. And so I want us, maybe if we go around on that, I think that's part of what we're talking about, that they're not really two separate things, so that the militarism has been the driving force of enabling the colonialism, which enabled and enables the predatory capitalism. So, if you
absolutely, I just came back from a trip down to the U.S. southern border in Texas. So I went to McAllen, Texas, and then went over into Reynosa, Mexico, because I wanted to talk with the immigrants there and the directors of the shelters there. And if you want to see the results of predatory capitalism and colonialism over 150 years, you can go to the border and you can see all the families fleeing 150 years of U.S. colonialism in South America and Central America, in the Caribbean. We were there. Our military was there to extract the natural resources, whether it be copper or iron or rubber or oil or fruit or whatever it was. And then we propped up these right-wing oligarchs. We left no history of democracy there. And when these governments eventually fractured, drug cartels move in, create terrible violence on the civilians, and so they flee to our border. So that's the blowback too, is all of these refugees, enormous populations of refugees who are just desperately fleeing terrible situations at home because of our U.S. imperialism.
Nick?
No, I would just say something about militarism. The various things that we're talking about are really based on ideas that we and other people have in our heads. In other words, it's not set in stone anywhere. It's not like a inevitable cosmic force that is making us feel like violence is an okay thing. And I was just up visiting in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has laws that say people, the general public, can't have handguns, period. Can't have it.
Right.
And people accept it. They're not saying you're taking away our rights, whatever. So, and here in this country, I was raised, going to Western, seeing the cavalry come and they chase away First Nation people. There were let's go to war, the whole propagandistic promotion of let's go to war that happened out of Hollywood.
Right.
Movies like They Were Expendable and submarine movies, all that. I grew up on that. So it wasn't really a big leap for me to decide I want to go in the Navy. I had my uncle was a very fine person who was in the Army in the Pacific, and I had a tremendous amount of respect for him. But in this country, there is a belief that violence undertaken by good people is really a good thing. In other words, if I'm going to kill you, I hate to do it, but you're a bad person, and so this is in all of our culture, our movies, our way of thinking about things. I attended Quaker meeting for a long time in a place called Chappaqua, New York, and it was the time of the Gulf War, and so somebody called it like a weighty Quaker. In other words, he'd been a Quaker and his family Quaker, all this. So at Quaker meeting, he said, well, I hate to say this, but it's really good that they want to take out Saddam Hussein. And I thought, wow, I'm not, and we had a hard time in that meeting to organize any kind of action, around this, because there is that thing that people brought with them from England. It wasn't the Mennonites, but the majority of people brought to this country the idea that it's okay to kill people in a systematic way if certain things happen. Like they don't want you to take their stuff and they happen to be not looking like you. That means they're, in the Declaration of Independence, savages. And we have the right to kill savages. And that is still deep in this culture. You go to church, you see the flag of the church, and then you see the American flag. What's that doing up there? Because the American flag symbolizes many things, but one of the things it symbolizes, home of the brave, land of the free, Star-Spangled Banner, bombs bursting in air, boom. That's it.
Free to take your land.
Yeah.
Right?
And so that's a deep thing in this culture we have to look at, because that affects how males treat women and children. That's what people's expectation is when you're dealing with men in this country. Violence could be just right behind the eyes. You just never know how that is because it's so part of this culture.
The violence is very, very much part of the culture. I want to appreciate that you brought up really indirectly that the doctrine of discovery, which is basically the founding of so much racism. And I think about Dr. King and how he said, the triplets of racism or bigotry and violence or militarism, and then the materialism or poverty that ensues. And it's all connected with that doctrine of discovery that said that put, the Christian, the white, the male, figures up at the top. And I want to say it doesn't specifically say about male. However, I think we might also agree that religions have been a bastion of male supremacy, and still mostly are. And that is probably the place where it's still the most rampant, and certainly pervasive in the culture in a lot of other ways. I'm taking a class in race, class, and gender right now, so we're getting into all of that. But it's all connected. So I just want to say that it's all connected, and that power over instead of power with, that power to take people's land, to enslave people and make them work. The idea that is okay, is just so against everything that we really, hold dear, and everything in our heart tells us that it's wrong. But yet there's all these other things in the society, and the what do I want to say, the archetypes that say that it's all right. But it's not. But everything in us tells us, and that shared humanity, as Brad was saying, tells us, and the sense of justice tells us we know it's wrong. We know it's wrong. One of the things, though, that I want to bring up that happens is that people believe in violence, or sometimes people feel that once things have gotten to a certain point, that there's not another solution. But back to, it's not a solution. It doesn't solve anything. So if we wanted to just talk a little bit, Brad, if you talk a little bit about your book, I think that's, just a perfect segue
Sure.
into talking about your book.
Yeah, and just to lead into the book, I was asked today in an interview about the book, why all of the talk about nonviolent resistance? And I said, well, because it works.
Yes.
Violence doesn't work. Violence has never ended violence.
Exactly.
War has never ended war. But nonviolence did end the Vietnam War. And nonviolence did end segregation in the South. And nonviolence did topple the totalitarian governments of the Soviet bloc countries. So it works. And that's a good reason for us to embrace it, regardless of whether we embrace it as part of our faith or our conscience or our morality or anything like that. It works. It's effective. So that's an important thing to remember. And the book that you mentioned is, it's called A Ministry of Risk. It was published by Fordham University last week. And it is the selected writings of Philip Berrigan on peace and nonviolence. And as most of your listeners probably know, Philip Berrigan was a Catholic priest who became a civil rights activist and an anti-war activist, and then a political prisoner, and then a felon, and then a fugitive from justice. And he ended up spending 11 years in prison for his nonviolent resistance to war. And that's what the American society does to the best of its citizens who clamor for peace. They put them in prison. And so Phil was willing to go to jail time and time again. He would not be silenced. He would not be stopped. He wanted to end the suffering, and he saw it as a central part of his faith to stand in the breach with the victims until the victimization would stop. And I think that's something as Americans that we can kind of embrace too, because we have this unique position in the world, right? We're in this country of safety and security and wealth. And we need to recognize that comes on the broken bones and the backs of a lot of vulnerable populations around the world. So we need to go into the breach with the victims. We need to stand with the victims, put our bodies between the victims and the victimizer.
And Nick?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Brad's book, because I was thinking about that too. I think that in the American culture, being a good citizen has to do with staying out of trouble with the law and voting on a regular basis and praying. And there's this in the history of labor, people know that there are strikes and have been violence against strikers, but there's a kind of gentility that seems to have set in this culture about let's not make trouble, let's try to be civil to each other in a very artificial way. And so Philip Berrigan really stands, and his brother stand as examples of how to object and still respect other people and show them respect and courtesy, but yet not go along with and put yourself in the way of violence and really profound greed. So I'm really glad we're talking about this because it's very inspiring to me based on things that have going on here in Northampton. And so I do hope people will read that book and
Oh, absolutely.
and take it as I could do that too. 'Cause I think people are just fed up. Most people just don't really know how pressed to the wall they feel until they stop and think, this place is messed up.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Going about our daily business. It's not. Most people don't feel like good. They're not happy. They're not happy about their lives. And the question is, how come? And it's not just because we don't have enough money or this or that. There's other things going on here that are profoundly troubling to the human spirit,
Right.
that are not being dealt with.
Well,
And that's what this book opens a door to. How do we deal with that?
and
These troubling things within ourselves.
And actually, one thing I want to say is I think you're so right. And it makes me think of, the victims are abroad and at home so that, we're safe. Well, we're all white, so we're all fairly safe, even though if we put our bodies on the line, we could still end up with 11 years like Phil Berrigan did. But mostly, we'll be safer, and a lot of people are very, very unsafe here, and all of that militarism is coming home. It's in the police. It's already here. It's been here. It's been, in the what I call Fear Inc., the military, industrial, congressional, media, contractor, prison, industrial complex that just chews people up and spits them out. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, first of all, I am so excited to read your book, Brad. Very interested. I've had the blessing of knowing his wife and daughter. I never had the blessing of meeting Reverend Phil Berrigan. Although I was co-defendants with his brother, with
Daniel.
No, not with Daniel. No,
Jerry.
With the Hancock 38. But I mean, big shout out to the Catholic workers and all the courage that is shown. They are they've been at the forefront right along. So that's one thing, to talk a little bit about the Catholic workers. And the other thing I just want to mention as we are going on about this part of it is this wonderful film called A Force More Powerful. Well, so to me, the force more powerful is love. Well, it's also nonviolent resistance, which is really love in action. So you're not judging the person. You're standing up against the bad acts or the bad behaviors or the bad policies or the whatever, but you're not hating on anybody. And it takes, it's what Dr. King said, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. So this, and I just want to say how that was how the India got the British out. So back to it works. So yeah. So if we could go around again on some of that.
This is such an important part of the conversation we're having tonight.
Yes.
This idea, because it embraces hope, and these are dark times, and it's easy to despair, but we don't have the luxury of despair. So we need to talk about what we can do. And when you talk about Phil Berrigan and Dan Berrigan and Jerry Berrigan and Phil's wife, Elizabeth McAllister, when you talk
Yes.
about the Catholic
Frida.
worker and Frida and all of these folks,
Yes.
this shows us what we can do and how we can succeed. And Nick mentioned a few moments ago that we all have something we can do. And that's why I named the book A Ministry of Risk, because Phil had his own particular ministry of risk, but every one of us has a ministry of risk that we can undertake. It'll look different for each one of us. Some of us may feel that prison witness is something we're called to do. Others, public speaking, writing, organizing, mobilizing, whatever it may be, we all can find a way to contribute, undertake a ministry of risk, and move this forward. And I think that's the hopeful part of all of this. We have to recognize that we don't need to be legendary mythical figures in this movement. We just need to play our own little role. And if each one of us does that, we can change history. We can end the war, we can end suffering, and we can be nonviolent, and we can teach nonviolence everywhere we go.
Nick?
Well, I want to go back to the idea of how are people feeling, because you were talking about people getting arrested by the police and these different things, but
Right.
I think that you say, well, white people are privileged and they have it a certain way and they don't have to worry.
As much. That's all I'd say.
Well, they from a physical and an economic standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint,
Sure.
I feel that we're living in an extremely toxic situation
Absolutely.
where we're seeing some of the most hideous behavior on the part of governments right now.
Right.
We're seeing the weather be very, very strange and
Right.
nothing being done about that of any significance. And so younger people are feeling this very directly in the sense that they're thinking, well, I'm going to have kids or I'm going
Right.
to go to school. And I know one couple who's very reluctant to have children.
Right.
And so you're walking around also hearing from people in their 40s, 50s, 60s saying, well, this is just the way humanity is. And so hence, that maybe we'll all just blow each other up. And so what can I do about it? I'm willing to accept that. Well, if you're thinking that way, just think about how your life must already be so empty and sad that you would say, well, maybe we'll all just blow up. And can you imagine, suppose a kid 4 years old came up and said to you, well, maybe I'll just die because it ain't worth it. So we have to check out these big things that are happening and how are we dealing with that? Are we just being spectators to our own demise? Or do we have other responsibilities to each other? It's not like just how do I feel? It really doesn't matter just how you feel all by yourself. One reason you don't feel that good is because this is a joint effort.
Right.
It's not just how do I feel. And so I think these are all things that are deeply, deeply troubling
Absolutely.
to people. They're looking, what the leadership is.
Sure.
They're not getting spiritual leadership from most of their religious institutions in terms of community.
Right.
They're getting palliative care for their soul and spirit on an individual basis, from pastors and thank God for that. But what we're talking about are really societal problems that have to do with the spiritual content of life. And so there's so many things in our lives that are abstracting to our humanity. I'm a lover of live music. 100 years ago, most communities had many people who could play instruments because there was no electronic reproduction of music. And that whole experience is hugely supportive. People sing in choirs, not just for religious purposes, because it makes them feel good and it's entertainment. And so then you go down and think about how you spend your day. Do you spend it talking to people, walking around, reading books? Do you spend most of the day behind a computer? And then these big issues come in. Who do you talk to about it? And how do you talk? Do you talk to people through the computer? Do you dare to talk to people on the street? I mean, there's all these kind of things that are very real for people. And yet we're told just basically sit down and shut up by the culture. Just watch the news, think about it, curse the television, but there's nothing you can do. And that's the thing that Brad's talking about, is because in a way, that's a way out for us emotionally. And I'll just say one more thing. There's a psychiatrist, his name is just skipping in my mind right at the moment. And he was talking about people who are feeling oppressed by nuclear weapons. And he said the best thing you can do to not feel that way is organize with other people to make it stop. Because otherwise you're just taking a beating and it's not good for you emotionally.
So one of the things I'd say is that what I've seen and also what I've personally experienced, is just how important it is and just how invigorating, inspiring, exciting, enlightening, and fun and painful at times. I mean, it's always a mixed bag. But working, people, one of the groups that I'm involved with is called Stop the Violence Coalition. It's working to stop, violence, gun violence in particular, or street violence, or, just violence here in Buffalo, right? Or anywhere. But so people who have lost family members to violent shootings. What we found when we wanted to do some grief counseling or, this kind of groups, people didn't want to do that. They wanted to come to regular meetings to help with the issue, to change the issue. So it's and a friend of mine who's a social worker wrote a book that's about the therapeutic value. So it's not a mystery that people feel better when we're doing things for each other, when we're in community. In fact, we were just working on a community flags that are happening here in Buffalo that are the program was initiated on April 4th, which is, of course, the day that Reverend Dr. King was murdered, as well as his Beyond Vietnam speech. And it's about helping to heal our community from some of the real grief from the massacre, from the blizzard, and then the more deep-seated grief that's gone on from all the triple evils or quintuple evils that we've had. And one of the things that that person made is healing only comes in community. Healing the beloved community. So, and that means working together. And it makes me think of this one Molly Ivins story where there's a person, in Texas who was an activist who was dying, and somebody said, well, what should we tell people? What do you want them to know from all your years of activism? And he said, tell them how much fun we had. Which it's not all fun. I mean, if you're arrested or, you're incarcerated or you're, beaten up by the police or anything like that. So it's not all fun, but there's a lot of fun in there too. So it's just that mix. So anyway, Brad.
I just want to add the name of the psychiatrist I was talking about is Robert J. Lifton, Lifton.
Thank you.
And he's done a lot of work on the psychological causes, effects of war and
Sure.
political violence. So uh, if people want to read any of his books, I'm looking on Wikipedia now. He's 97 years old
Wow.
and lives in Massachusetts, but he's really a very profound thinker.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Brad?
Some of the finest people I've gotten to know are people in the resistance movement and peace and
Of course.
social justice groups. And so I think if you want to be fully human, if anybody's out there feeling despair and you want to feel fully human, get involved. Be a part of that sense of community that we're
Right.
talking about,
Right.
and you will feel alive. Because to be fully human is to care and then to act on those feelings of caring. And what the empire wants us to do, what the military industrial complex wants us to do is to shut off our humanity, to be diverted with mindless entertainment, to be worried about economic issues, or to keep us in a state of economic anxiety and things like that. So we don't have time to care about our brothers and sisters across the globe. But to do that means we have to shut off the humanity that is within us. And if we do that, then what are we? We're just vessels, robots at that point. So the idea is embrace that part of us that is our soulful part, our spiritual part, the human part, and that will cause you to act in community with others to save folks. And standing on the sidelines is not an option. We all know Dante's quote, right? The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of great moral crisis remain on the sidelines, remain neutral. And so we don't want to remain on the sidelines. We want to be involved. We want to be alive. We want to be human.
We need to. Right. Right. And Nick?
Well, at the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal.org website, if you look in the resources section, you can find a map. It's an interactive map that was done by Christian Sorensen. And on that map, you can look in your state and find out where there are, I guess you call them war plants. In other words, where there are facilities owned by major weapons makers. And what we really need right now, that is not happening in the way that it might, is for people to go to those plants and basically say we want them converted to piecework, and from time to time shut them down, call on conscience of the workers to figure out what other work could be done at those plants, and to we say, well, it's psychological warfare. I would say, put it another way, we need to have call to conscience for people who are working in those plants that are shipping weapons right now, not only to Israel but to other places. But we can see the impact of those weapons, especially in Israel. The American Friends Service Committee put out a report back in the fall that listed companies that are profiting from the war in Gaza. And so people can Google that, use sort of a search engine, to look for American Friends Service Committee companies profiting from assault on Gaza. And then they can look on this map and see where are those companies that they're close to.
So as we've talked about this before, you know that we've been getting ready to do something, before very long. And one of the things is we have a number of plants all over Western New York. So to the north of us, south, east, I don't think to the west. And if you go very much further west, you're already in Lake Erie. So, but they are, just in a arc around Buffalo, and we are planning. So I want to invite people to join us as we do some planning. The next Resist Militarism Task Force meeting. Of course, this is the Western New York Peace Center Talking Peace video radio show. And this is a Western New York Peace Center task force that is called Resist Militarism, that I co-chair with Russell Brown, who's also a veteran for peace. So anyway, on April 23rd, Tuesday, April 23rd at 7 p.m., there'll be a meeting. Of course, there's other, there'll be a Facebook event page. It'll be on our website and everything else. But anyway, it will be 7 p.m. on Tuesday, April 23rd at the Western New York Peace Center at 1272 Delaware Avenue, where we're going to talk. And I don't feel like this is really the place to necessarily mention who and where it's going to be, but I'm going to say I've always agreed with the Gandhian way of we will say exactly what and where we're going to go and what we're going to do, and we'll be ready to, so that everyone knows what is happening, and we'll put them on notice where they're in violation of the Leahy law. So the four corporations that you mentioned are just four of them. Northrop Grumman is another one that didn't get mentioned that is also very, very complicit. And back to, as you said, there's all these ways that it hurts us. And the opportunity cost, I just wanted to say, this is airing on tax day, so people should know that fully a majority of the federal discretionary budget goes into all of this war profiteering, into the weapons manufacturers and the armaments industry and the military. And that doesn't even count that also, in our local, cities and towns and counties, that there's also, I know I can say in Buffalo, there's a huge proportion that goes into the policing. So I don't know why everybody behind a gun, we can't give them shovel the money fast enough in that direction. And what it means is then for caring for ourselves, for the health, education, and welfare of people, we don't have the money because it's already been spent. It's already being spent because we're shoveling out the door as fast as we can to fund the military and the other Fear Inc. Associated groups. So if we could go around just on that point a little bit. Brad?
Yeah, we spend, of course, $1 trillion a year on war making when you factor everything in. And when you look at the budget for the State Department, which is that department tasked with peacemaking, we budget $63 billion. So that says a lot about this country and where the government places its priorities. And I think that it's important that we recognize that tax day is a really important wake-up day. There are war tax resistors out there who refuse to pay their taxes because they do not want to be complicit in that. Right. There are groups, Vicki, like yours, that are taking up actions at weapons plants, and thank you for doing that. We don't want to end up, as Phil Berrigan said, as spiritual cadavers. We want to be resisting, because we have to resist this war machine, right, for our own souls and our own selves as well as others. Right. So it's important to be a part of it and to share in all of that kind of activity that's going on out there. Nick and I, over a year ago, went down to the 4 weapons manufacturers that have been indicted by this tribunal and served subpoenas on them.
Yes.
And then when they didn't comply with our subpoenas, we returned 90 days later and served contempt citations on them.
Hallelujah.
So the idea is to keep the focus on, keep the pressure on, get the spotlight on them so people, whether it's in the streets or reading the newspapers, say, what is this all about? What's this war crimes tribunal about? And I think fair-minded people, once looking at the evidence that we present, will come to the same conclusion we did, is that they're killing people for money.
We are a co-sponsor, I should say. The Western New York Peace Center is a co-sponsor, and honored and grateful to be a co-sponsor of the tribunal. And we are sharing, the videos, and there's so much just clear and overwhelming evidence. I did want you to mention the 4 companies again that you served.
So the 4 companies that we served subpoenas were Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, RTX, and then the drone maker, General Atomics, because we wanted to bring drone warfare into the dialogue
Right.
and be sure that that was included. We know that they're not the only industries by far, but they're representative of the U.S. war industry. And so those are the ones we focused on. And when you watch the videos, you're going to see very detailed factual evidence supporting the allegations of what they've done and how they are guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity as defined in the Rome Statute of the ICC.
Right. You're so right. I'm so grateful for you all doing that. Nick?
Well, I would say for a person who isn't really deeply involved with, studying, these companies or the history, their history overseas, I think we have to really understand that our government is very obedient to these financial forces and very obedient to the idea of colonialism. And so how do you get a population of the United States to go along with this? And I think that what's happened, there are a couple of things, but one of the main things has been, since the Second World War, scaring the public intentionally. The threat of the missile gap threat, leading up to the election of 1960. Prior to that, the threat of communism, the repression, and the Red Scare, and then after we got rid of the Soviet Union, people think we got rid of the Soviet Union. Then suddenly we have to be afraid of terrorists because certain things happen by a very small group of people, but suddenly this made it necessary to go and invade Iraq, to invade Afghanistan, to expand military bases all over the world. As soon as we pulled out of Afghanistan, suddenly we're talking about the Chinese threat. I don't think we missed a day between the departure from Afghanistan and Biden talking about the Chinese threat, with the way paved by Barack Obama in our what do they call it, our shift or
pivot to Asia.
Pivot to Asia.
Right.
Oh, it sounds like, well, we're going to pivot to. And the people in this country, do they know what Asia is? How many people in this country have been to Asia? It's vast.
Right.
And we feel like we're going to control what goes on in Asia because we have the atomic bomb or the hydrogen bomb or the plutonium bomb. The whole idea is crazy, but when you have people who don't know about these places and you tell them China's a threat, well, and now we're telling the Chinese you're making too much cheap green energy stuff. So now you're a competitor to us, and we want to be making green energy stuff, but we want to make high quality green energy stuff. At this point in history, any green energy stuff seems like a hell of a lot better than none.
Right.
But yet China is now a threat to who? To a bunch of businessmen. It's not a threat. And we go to the store, we buy all their stuff. Probably half of what I have wearing or all of it made in China. And yet they're a threat. And people say, well, yeah, China is I have people in my family. One of my sons said to me, right after the Afghanistan thing, well, Dad, what do you think about the threat from China? I thought, wow.
Right.
So, but I sympathize with people because you scare the hell out of people.
Right.
And then you tell them we need a big budget to protect ourselves. People will say, yeah, of course we do. And people don't care how much money you spend as long as they feel protected. $1 trillion? Do you need another trillion? Go for it.
You know, it makes me think of Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine, which is almost ancient history now. Probably what was it, 20 years ago or something? He made that film, but maybe not quite that long. But whatever it is, you know, he put it so effectively of the way the hype is all about fear mongering in the U.S. That so much of our media says what you need to know about killer bees, you know, everything about back to the guns, the gun culture, and you know the idea that you know the recipe for that the antidote to a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun, which has been disproven time and time again. And you know, we can talk about you know the suicides, the domestic violence, and the accidents that happen with guns. That is the bulk of of the usage of the guns, which are threats to the people who have them. More, you know. So anyway, I really appreciate what you said, because the fear, that fear mongering, and the fear that is the opposite of love. You know, it's that fear that, you know, we're afraid of each other instead of feeling one with each other. And actually that one love, you know, that whole, you know, in all of our religions, it's in there about loving each other and caring for each other. And it's just it's in our hearts that we know when we feel good, that's what it's coming from. That's the good. That's the good. Well,
Thomas, I just wanted to say, Thomas Merton, the Catholic mystic, wrote that the root of war is fear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's back to full circle when we started off talking about Palestine and Gaza. It's fear. So traumatized people in that situation where people are making them more fearful, and then other people who are fearing that, you know, the Palestinians are living in fear also for good reason. I mean, they absolutely are, you know, threatened, and especially now, as they just keep ratcheting it up. So anyway, so let us go around one more time with sort of let's talk about how people can get more involved, what people can do. And that's been a thread throughout what we've talked about, but just a little more about what people can do and how people can get more involved. So, Brad, starting with you, and I think mention your book again, where people can find it, you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the book is A Ministry of Risk, The Writings of Philip Berrigan. You can get it at Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. It's published by Florida University
books
Press.
Are sold, so they don't have to go to Amazon. They could go to their local bookstore and just tell them to order it.
Yeah, they can tell them to order it. Exactly. Or you can go to bookshop.org, which is a great alternative to Amazon. You know,
wonderful. Good.
So that's something. But in terms of getting involved, there are so many wonderful groups out there: Code Pink, World Beyond War, Peace Action, Pax Christi, Pace Bene. You know, just join a group. There's going to be one in your community. Get involved. Start working with some people. Start out small if you're not comfortable. A lot of people aren't comfortable going out onto the streets and carrying signs or doing whatever. But just go and listen and get involved. Have conversations with your neighbors. But again, you know, embrace your humanity. Recognize that we share this planet with everybody else. You were originally going to have as a subject for this night the idea about what comes from the skies, you know, right? And what comes from the skies? Well, extreme weather comes from the skies. Bombs are coming from the skies. All these things that are killing people and altering lives and creating mass numbers of refugees are coming from the skies. And we've got to stop this. So there are so many ways to get involved. And again, Code Pink, World Beyond War, Pax Christi, Peace Action, just Google it and you'll find it, and you will be thankful that you took a part and you got involved.
I just have to interject. The Western New York Peace Center is a peace action group, Peace Action New York State. We're part of Peace Action New York State. Deidre Emel, our executive director, is the upstate co-chair for Peace Action New York State. But we also, I mean, we had Medea Benjamin. I mean, Kathy Kelly is with World Beyond War. fantastic resources. So thank you for mentioning all of those groups. In fact, I was just putting out links that we're going to have on the website that are links to all those groups, which have so much great information, including the National Priorities Project, which is all about what we were talking about, the imbalance about how our money, our tax dollars are being spent, and the opportunity cost of all that money that's going into war making that does not allow us to take care of our needs or even help people around the world with their needs. So anyway, thank you for mentioning all of those. Those are great ones, Brad.
Yes, you're welcome. Absolutely.
And Nick, what would you say? And you've talked about that too, but a little more on that. Some of the things people can
I
do.
think it would be helpful, and certainly it's helpful to me, to listen to Democracy Now!
Oh,
in
yes.
the morning. People say, "Oh, it makes me so upset. Oh, it's so troubling," and this and that. Well, if it makes you feel upset and it's troubling, it's an indication you're going to feel a lot better if you try to do something about it. So you need the information. There's a commentator on YouTube named Richard Medhurst, and he's got a very interesting and I think well-informed commentary almost every day about what's going on in Gaza and the Middle East and some other things too.
So how do you spell his name, please?
His last name is spelled Medhurst, Richard Medhurst.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also recommend watching Al Jazeera from time to time. The reporters there are extremely courageous. And it was pointed out on Democracy Now! Today that the reporting that's being done out of Gaza and where is by people whose families, are among those who are being killed and starved and suffering. Mm-hmm. And so there's kind of a glass bubble around the United States, generated by most of the press. Well, we don't want to make people too upset. Well, we don't want to, make the Israeli government upset. We don't want to make, and so by the time you're done with that, and I think most people watching, Fox News or MSNBC or whatever, they know they're just getting regurgitated pretty much nonsense all the time. But it's something people are trained to do is watch those. Another source of news that I think is very helpful is the Intercept, mm-hmm. and also people could read the Guardian, mm-hmm. so that they get a different slant on what's going on. But without that information, I don't think we have the motivation to take some of these things on, because we're so far separated from those realities. And I think it's fair to say that almost everybody in the world knows what the hell's going on with colonialism, except people in the United States.
Well, yeah, thank you. So those are all very, excellent suggestions and very important. And actually, I want to say the Guardian did some of the initial reporting on the that the two groups that are most often killed by the police are armed white men or unarmed black men, and all the data that came from the Guardian. So even about our domestic things, we need to listen to Democracy Now! For our domestic and international issues, and they are all connected. So I just want to, I really can't thank you both enough. You've just shared so much. You've worked so hard, really, all your lives, sharing and inspiring and putting your own freedom on the line, your own lives on the line, and just, working together with other people, inspiring other people. And it really is tremendous. So we're just very grateful to have had you on the show. Oh, and I will mention that just as you were talking so much about how war is invisible in this country, just a little reminder to people or announcement to people that we will be having Norm Solomon on this show on April It'll stream on April 29th, and then it will be on the radio a week later. So
Yeah.
that'll be exciting too. But anyway, we really can't thank you enough. So for everything you do, and for coming on the show, and for your wonderful books and all your wonderful work, both of you. So thank you. This is
Oh, I want to put in a plug for people joining Veterans for Peace. I'm on national board of that. I was in the Navy.
Thank
all
you.
that. And
Thank
so
you.
I hope that'll help people.
Yeah, and Veterans for Peace is very much a part of our Resist Militarism, because Russell is on both of those, and he's also our Chapter 128 chair. So thank you for mentioning Veterans for Peace. Thank you for all that you both do and all that you both are. This is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love. Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
very
you, Vicki.
much. Yeah,
Thank you.
that is great.